Okay, my name is Donna Mead, and welcome everyone. Nice to meet some of you. This is great. Um, Hi, Trina. Uh, we are the Sustainable Resource Committee. I just introduced myself. Charlotte is a member. Charlotte, raise your hand. And our extraordinaire technician is Karosh Mahania. And we are going to do we we have a title of Juneteenth, but it's actually going to cover a bit of diversity or a lot of diversity. So let me go over what we're going to do. We're first going to show the film, and then after the film, Mahtab will open it up, a little bit of a discussion from her, as well as encourage comments, questions from all of you. So one of the first things I want to do is read the land acknowledgement. I acknowledge that we, am on indigenous land of the coast of the Salish people, who have reserved treaty rights to this land, specifically the Snoqualmie Indian tribe. I and we thank these caregivers and caretakers of this land who have lived and continue to live here since time immemorial. The name of this film that you're going to see is only 9.5 minutes. It's called Forging a Path to Racial Justice. It's by a really dear friend, an incredibly brilliant filmmaker, local, Michael McDermott. And after that, we'll then have a friend and a professional extraordinaire, Mahtab to talk. And I will, before we actually move into her talk, I'm going to give you a bit of her bio. But for right now, I'd like you to go ahead and enjoy this film by Michael.
We join our fellow citizens in heartfelt grief at the deaths of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and so many others whose lives were suddenly taken by appalling acts of violence. These heartbreaking violations against fellow human beings, due only to the color of their skin, have deepened the dismay caused by a pandemic whose consequences to the health and livelihoods of people of color have been disproportionately severe. This has come to pass against a backdrop of long-standing racial injustice in virtually every aspect of American life. It is clear that racial prejudice is the most vital and challenging issue we face as a country. Yet amidst these tragedies, there are also signs of hope. Countless citizens have arisen to proclaim the truth that we are one nation, and to demand specific actions to address the pervasive inequities that for too long have shaped our society. We have remembered who we aspire to be as a people, and are determined to make a change for the better. This moment beckons us to a renewed commitment to realize the ideal of e pluribus unum, out of many one, the very ideal upon which America was founded. To create a just society begins with recognition of the fundamental truth that humanity is one. But it is not enough to simply believe this in our hearts. It creates the moral imperative to act, and to view all aspects of our personal, social, and institutional lives through the lens of justice. It implies a reordering of our society more profound than anything we have yet achieved. and it requires the participation of Americans of every race and background. For it is only through such inclusive participation that new moral and social directions can emerge. Whatever immediate results might come from the current demonstrations, the elimination of racism will require a sustained and concerted effort. It is one thing to protest against particular forms of injustice. It is far more profound to challenge to create a new framework for justice. Our efforts can only succeed when we learn to build relationships with each other based on sincere friendship, regard, and trust, which in turn become pillars for the activities of our institutions and communities. It is essential for us to join hands in a process of learning how to create models of what we want to see in every dimension of American life, as we learn to apply the principle of oneness through practical engagement and experience. To this end, we offer the following thoughts. An essential element of the process will be honest and truthful discourse about current conditions and their causes, and understanding in particular the deeply entrenched notions of anti-Blackness that pervade our society. We must build the capacity to truly hear and acknowledge the voices of those who have directly suffered from the effects of racism. This capacity should manifest itself in our schools, the media, and other civic arenas, as well in our work and personal relations. This should not end with words, but lead to meaningful, constructive action. There are already significant efforts underway to learn how to create models of unity in neighborhoods and communities throughout the nation. Baha'is have been persistently engaged in such efforts for many years. The aim is not unity in sameness, it is unity in diversity. It is the recognition that everyone in this land has a part to play in contributing to the betterment of society, and that true prosperity, material and spiritual, will be available to us all to the degree that we live up to this standard. We should earnestly discover what is being done and what truly helps to make a difference and why. We should share this knowledge throughout the country as a means of inspiring and assisting the work of others. If we do this, we could soon find ourselves in the midst of a mass transition toward racial justice. Religion, an enduring source of insight concerning human purpose and action, has a key role to play in this process. All faith communities recognize that we are essentially spiritual beings. All proclaim some version of the Golden Rule, to love others as we do ourselves. Take, for example, the following passage from the Bahá'í scriptures in which God addresses humankind. Know ye not why we created you all from the same dust? That no one should exalt himself over the other. Ponder at all times in your hearts how ye were created. Since we have created you all from one same substance, it is incumbent upon you to be even as one soul, to walk with the same feet, eat with the same mouth, and dwell in the same land, that from your inmost being, by your deeds and actions, the signs of oneness and the essence of detachment may be made manifest. To understand and firmly believe that we are all children of God provides us with access to vast spiritual resources, motivating us to see beyond ourselves and to work steadily and sacrificially in the face of all obstacles. It helps to ensure that the process is consistent with the goal to create communities characterized by justice. It gives us the faith, strength, and creativity to transform our own hearts, as we also work for the transformation of society. We believe that the tribulations now encompassing much of the world are the symptoms of humanity's failure to understand and embrace our essential oneness. The interrelated threats of climate change, gender discrimination, extreme wealth and poverty, unfair distribution of resources, and the like all stem from this deficiency and can never be resolved if we do not awaken to our dependence upon each other. The world has contracted to a neighborhood, and it is important to appreciate that what we do in America impacts not only our own country, but the entire planet. We should also never forget that the richness of our diversity and our founding ideals of liberty and justice attract the eyes of the world to us. They will be influenced by what we achieve or fail to achieve in this regard. It is not an exaggeration to say that the cause of world peace is linked to our success in resolving the issue of racial injustice. The oneness of humanity is the foundation of our future. Its realization is the inevitable next stage in our life on this planet. We will replace a world society based on competition and conflict, and driven by rampant materialism, with one founded upon our higher potential for collaboration and reciprocity. This achievement will mark the universal coming of age of the human race. How soon we achieve this, and how easily, will depend upon the commitment we demonstrate to this cardinal principle. We have come to a moment of great public awareness and rejection of injustice. Let us not lose this opportunity. Will we commit to the process of forming a more perfect union? Will we be guided by the better angels of our nature to choose the course of wisdom, of courage, and of unity? Will we choose to truly become that city upon a hill, to serve as an inspiration to all of humanity? Let us join hands with each other in commitment to the path of justice. Together we can surely achieve this.
Well, it is my honor and my pleasure to introduce Mahtab Mahmouzadeh, and I'm going to give you a little background of Mahtab. She has a master's in education. She's been teaching the leading equity work in independent schools since 1996. She has taught grades K through 12 at all levels, as well as led anti-racist work as a classroom discussion and practitioner. She currently serves as the Director of Diversity at the Overlake School. Mahtab has a background in African American history, international relations, adapted leadership for equity. She has worked in a variety of settings, strategic planning for equity and inclusion, hiring for diversity and cultural diversity and competency, to training and consulting with independent charter schools in districts and international schools as well on equity and inclusion practice. Mahtab is an Iranian American, first generation immigrant of Bahá'í, and a proud mom of two lovely children. They're the light of her life, the light of the community, and she enjoys dancing and singing and hip hop. Welcome, Mahtab. We've wanted to do this with you for some time, so thank you for joining us finally. We're so proud to have you as our community member and speaker tonight. So the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. It's wonderful to be with all of you. I feel very inadequate to be in this space to talk, especially from the perspective of looking at the vision for racial justice from the perspective of the Baha'i community. So I thought what I would do is share just a little bit of storytelling and talk about my experience growing up in the American Baha'i community, which has informed my work. The work I do is completely inspired and by being a Baha'i and growing up with Baha'i teachings and ideals. From early childhood, the quote of Baha'u'llah that said, "Let your vision be world embracing rather than confined to your own self," really permeated my spirit and my soul. And through it, I developed a deep, deep love for humanity. And it was not just some sort of kumbaya love, but it was a love in which in my family and in my community, my spiritual community, was impressed upon me that whatever I study, whatever course and direction of life I pursue should be in service to the oneness of humanity. I think the video was so great. And I think some of the things that the video alluded to have really driven the work I do in education and in the work I try to do with teachers and the sphere of influence that I have, which has been in the field of K-12 education. One is that principle of the oneness of humanity that permeates everything, that understanding that we are essentially evolving in our understanding that we are one human race. And this is by no means an approach of color blindedness, because often is used as a means to have a colorblind approach, is actually the exact opposite. It is really the celebration of seeing and hearing and upholding justice for all members of humanity, and being, as Baha'u'llah states, anxiously concerned with the age in which we live in and focus on its liberation. So it's anything but this notion of, oh, we believe in our oneness and we're just going to move on. And it's really the exact opposite. I was recently just very coincidentally, ran into the wife of Nathan Rutstein, who had passed away many years ago. He was a Baha'i educator. When I was doing my undergraduate thesis, ever since from my youth, I was very interested in dismantling racism in the field of education. And I had gone to study under him for a while because he had written some really interesting books in the field of education. And he impressed upon me the importance of first teaching children about the principle of our oneness of humanity. Because if we don't first understand our connectedness to each other, then when I spoke about the injustices that humans have done to other humans, our hearts wouldn't be stirred to move to action. I had always thought of my approach as really focusing on the injustices, looking at my content area expertise was in American history, looking at the experiences of racial division from 1619, looking at the system of enslavement. But I realized through Nate Rutstein that if I don't first start with helping students understand that we are one human race, that we are one nation, we are not we're not divided by as citizens. We all have a responsibility to advance racial justice. Once I established that oneness, when I talked about enslavement, when I talked about systems of lynching and all the horrors that American history has in its history, my students felt differently. It was no longer those people over there, but it was our people, my brothers and sisters, my cousins. And it took on a very different disposition for them. The second framework that I think the video alludes to is the understanding of our innate nobility, the nobility of all human beings. And I think that's also a disposition that allows us to see every human being as not as a stranger, but as a friend. And again, I don't mean this in a kumbaya sense. I mean this really, truly as a perspective to which we, and I hope teachers engage and work with students. I'm going to go do something with the dog. Excuse me. Sorry. I'm so sorry. often what I see in the field of education, when I train teachers and I look at experiences of students, of Black students in the classroom, I see a real dangerous absence of love and a real absence of not seeing their inherent nobility and their dignity. And in my own experience and my training, I was exposed to Maria Montessori's work that really did highlight this importance of seeing the innate dignity of every child. But this is not just an ideal, it's a practice. So that's very important. For me, when I taught, I love all my students. And for me, loving my Black students in a society that carries so many illusions and falsehoods about Black people became my centering objective. So often when I would try to design classes and experiences for students, I would think, or any decision I would make, and it still informs how I do my DEI work, is how will this decision elevate and benefit and center Black people? And I know that by centering them in the solutions in which I seek to do towards advancing equity, it benefits all of us. So that's a real belief in that second framework. And the third is the concept of universal participation. This is what I really love about being a Baha'i. What's interesting, I love it, and it's also like such a great weight. But often in many religions, you're saved and you're done. You accept the religion and you're saved and you're done. And the Baha'i faith, you have to work. And this concept of universal participation is key and central, and is one of the ones I engage with in particular, engaging my students and engaging teachers. That none of us are immune from the forces of racism in this society, and every single one of us has a responsibility to rid our hearts and souls of the evils of racism individually, and to work in community and to advance society to also eliminate racial prejudice. And this is our charge. It's not something that we relinquish for any moment. It has to be something that stays close to us and that we work towards. And this universal participation means that every person in society is a protagonist. We all have a role to play. And so I think that's really, really important as well. What I'd like to do is share a little bit with you about my experience as an Iranian American growing up in the American Baha'i community, and to shed some light about my experience to help kind of frame what that journey was like for me that led me to what I'm doing today. I'm by no means special, but I think in highlighting the story is really highlighting the kind of example that the Baha'i community is striving and struggling and sacrificing, hopefully, to become. Today, we would be Emmett Till's 82nd birthday. As someone mentioned, Donna mentioned before we started our presentation. I remember when I was in my youth, I never was exposed to anything in my American education from the time I came in third grade to the time I graduated from high school. By design and intention, enslavement was taught to me in frankly, a dishonest way. And I came upon the story of Emmett Till in my late teens. And I remember when I read his story, I burst into tears. It had such a deep and profound impact on me that I have the book, The Murder of Emmett Till, in my nightstand still. And it's a gut-wrenching story, especially for any human in the world. As a mother now too, to just see the vicious crime committed against a child, and the injustice which allowed these people to get away. And we see, until we learn to dismantle racism, we will see reverberations of this evil disease in a myriad of ways, and continue to see it today. I was born and raised in my formative years in Tehran, Iran. As an Iranian child, I had really no concept of American racism. I didn't see myself as brown. And my only exposure to Americans was through American television, which was Dynasty. and Days of Our Lives. And every year, my father would take me to go see the Harlem Globetrotters, because my father was an avid athlete and he loved the Harlem Globetrotters. As a child, I had no concept of Black or white. I actually didn't see the members of the athletes of the Harlem Globetrotters any differently than I saw people in Dynasty. My concept of Americans was that they were big, they had lots of stuff. That was what perception I gained from what I was viewing, because we had obviously dark-skinned Iranians and light-skinned Iranians, and I saw no differentiation in them. Having lived through the revolution in Iran and the trauma of the revolution in Iran, we became asylum seekers. And my father had been essentially drugged and sent out of the country from a hospital bed, because otherwise he would have been killed for being a Baha'i months earlier. And we had come to the United States to reunite. And I was told nothing of what was happening because we were interrogated every step of the way. And I'm sure to protect us, my mother just told us we were going on a summer vacation to the United States. And that's really what I understood. But I was longing to see my father. I was 8 years old. My uncle had just been executed by the Islamic regime the day before my 8th birthday, 2 months prior. And I was just longing to see my father. It was as long as I had been separated from my father. So we were going through customs and immigration, actually in the city of Atlanta, after we'd gone through it in New York. And Atlanta was the place that we landed because the only relative we had in the United States was an uncle who was an engineer in Atlanta. So as we were walking after the 36 hours grueling process of leaving Iran, coming to the different spots in New York and Atlanta, my mother had held her hands so tight I couldn't feel the circulation, but I didn't have the heart to tell her. And she said to Mariam and I, my sister and I, your father's on the other side of the doors. I share the story with students and any opportunity I get, because it's a really important story about the pervasiveness of racism in American society. I didn't know a single word in English language. I knew nothing of American culture. I saw this as a stopover because in my 8-year-old mind, we were going to go pick up dad, go back to Iran, and then figure out next steps. Because that was what my reality of my understanding was. And so they sent us a translator. And I think maybe it was a 2-minute walk from where we connected with the translator. And she may have been with us earlier. I wasn't paying attention to the time that we would get to the doors where the doors would open. And on the other side, I knew my father was going to be waiting for us. The woman starts very rapidly in Farsi to say to my mother, be careful of the Black people. They will steal your purses and they will rape you. I remember my mother's gasping because I had never heard the word rape in Farsi before. And as she was going on with a franticness, as if behind that door, there was some Black people that I had no concept of that were going to be behind this door and they were going to be dangerous. I share the story because my miseducation and the lies told me about my Black brothers and sisters came even before I even stepped foot into this country. I mean, I stepped foot before I went out of the immigration and customs. That's how pervasive the evil of racism is. And I don't know what it was about the way she was talking. And maybe it was because I had just lived through the revolution in Iran, but I had no concept what she was talking about of Black people. But I had the distinct feeling in that moment, because I remember the story, that I was being lied to. And I spent the first months, obviously, in America, trying to understand everything from American culture and society and learn the English language. And as I was learning the American system, I was learning about Black people. I was being told many lies about Black people. But what's interesting is when you're an immigrant, you pay attention to everything because you're trying to make sense of everything. And all the things that I was being told by Black people, I was not witnessing any of them. When I was being told that Black people are violent and dangerous, the violence I witnessed were by the police cops. The violence I witnessed were by white people taking advantage of Black people. So I would be hearing things and I would be seeing things that didn't match what I was hearing. But obviously the pervasiveness of this spiritual disease and permeates all of our souls. Having the distinct pleasure, honor of growing up in the Atlanta Baha'i community was an antidote to me for that, because my friends, my Christian friends, because I was in the Bible Belt, would always say to me, I'm going to hell. They would also say to me that Jesus didn't believe in race mixing, which I thought was crazy, because they would tell me these things and I'm like, which they know Jesus is Middle Eastern, like what do they think I am? All these things that they believed. And I would often go to church with them, and I would see Sundays, as Dr. King would state, as the most segregated day of the year. And it was. There was Black church and white church, but the Atlanta Baha'i community was a diversity and integration of people and races. And so seeing those exceptional examples of American Baha'is, Black, white, Persian, who were serving the faith, and from my childhood, we would have these race amity picnics, which I would later put together, happened on the same day as Juneteenth did. I didn't know what Juneteenth was, but the Baha'i community and the Atlanta Baha'i community would host these wonderful picnics, and they would call them race amity picnics. And they were diversity of Black, white, brown, every hue of humanity coming together to celebrate the vision of race unity. And so I grew up in this wonderful Baha'i community that was an anecdote to me. Again, not that we were by any means immune from those forces, but as a youth, I was involved with a very diverse, multiracial group of young people, and we would travel through the South and share the teachings and the principles of Baha'u'llah through community service. And through that, I spent a tremendous amount of time among Black people. And I deeply, deeply fell in love with Black people through that experience, through my experience of Baha'i service. And the Atlanta Baha'i Center is located in a very, very historic part of Atlanta. It's on Edgewood, and it's a very simple white building, and it's about 3 blocks from the resting place of Dr. King and Miss Coretta Scott King. And the Atlanta Baha'i community for years has had a very close relationship with the King Center. And my youth was spent volunteering as a Baha'i through the Baha'i community, the Atlanta Baha'i community, serving at the King Center from the time I was 14 to 24. I had the honor of meeting all the members of the King family, knowing Miss Coretta Scott King, meeting Dr. Ralph Abernathy, all these champions of American history that were void and not present in my own education. So all that I was experiencing, again, was absent from my educational experience. And so one of the reasons I wanted to go into education is because I realized the ways in which by design I was lied to perpetuate falsehoods. And so that really pushed me to want to be an educator and pushed me to study American history. I focused African-American studies. I had the honor, because I was a student at Georgia Tech, I had the honor and the ability to take the majority of my African-American history classes at the historically Black college. I took them at Spelman College, which was wonderful. I studied under my first course in multicultural education was with Dr. Ferris King, Dr. King's sister, was my first teacher who taught me about multicultural education in university. But the perspective and the teachings of the Baha'i faith, this concept of the oneness of humanity, the understanding and the true belief of the inherent dignity of all, and this charge of universal participation, are what have directed my life to do what I do. I really consider it my humble means of worshiping my faith. And I think and I'll end it with this, and open it to any questions folks have. As I said, as an immigrant, you pay attention to everything. And when immigrants are assimilated into American culture, we often I often hear immigrants say, well, this has nothing to do with me. I just got here. That's a part of the lie. We are taught very clearly about white supremacy and becoming white adjacent as a means of assimilation. We are taught very explicitly about disassociating ourselves with Black people. And the Baha'i faith was the antithesis of that. It was the anecdote of that. And it gave me the opportunity to worship and serve alongside Black Americans. And that proximity, that relationship based in the love of God, based in the teachings of the Baha'i faith, it's a love that helps you fight the constancy of these diseases. But one of the things I became very obsessed with were funerals, because it became some sort of obsession that whenever a funeral was happening, the police officer would make all traffic stop, and I would watch the funeral procession. And I could always guess the race of the person from the funeral procession. And I became a little obsessed with this. I would count the cars. I'd be like, oh yeah, that's definitely a white person that's been buried. That's definitely a Black person that's been buried. My father died 17 years on the exact day that my uncle had been executed, the day before my 25th birthday. And I remember standing at his gravesite when the funeral procession was coming up. And I had gotten so accustomed to looking at the cars and counting faces that when I saw my father's funeral procession, I started to wail, because it was the first time in 17 years that you would have not guessed the class or the race of my father based on who had come to his funeral. And at that point, I realized the legacy that he left for me and my sister, and the recognition that I hope I die that way one day. That I want to live a life that when I die, no one can guess my class, my education, my gender, or my race. And I attribute much of that to his belief as a Baha'i and how he chose to live his life in relationships and in action, and the model that he set for us. And I think one of the biggest losses that Americans don't recognize when we live in these segregated lives, our schools are now more disparate and segregated than they were before Brown versus Board of Education, is that one of the tremendous losses that Americans have is to have intimate relationships, intimate connection with one another across racial lines. And we don't even know what a loss that is. And for those of us who've had the honor to live in truly integrated communities in spiritual worship and service with them, it impacts the entire trajectory of our lives. So I will end with that. And if there's any questions or comments anyone has, please. All right, we can talk amongst ourselves, one another as well. Thank you for your time.
I have a question. You mentioned at the end, yeah, factually, actually, schools are more segregated now than any time in history. I'm just wondering, like, what for you do you see as causes for optimism, or do you see a new attitude in the youth, or a new openness, or what are things you're seeing that we can be hopeful about? Or do you? I shouldn't say. There's an assumption built in that you do see things. So maybe.
Yeah, if we look at the trajectory of racial progress and racist progress, and this is the work of Ibram Kendi, How to Be an Anti-Racist, we see that there are two parallel processes. And the Baha'i faith mentions these forces of integration and forces of disintegration that you see, and we see this, it always goes in ebbs and flows. So, with the national reckoning of the murder of George Floyd, for many diversity practitioners and those who are interested in the unification of the human race, this was an opportunity to seize. And as we were trying to push the needle, whatever the expression is, I was also thinking, oh dear, I wonder what the pushback's going to be to this one, because the bigger the national reckoning, the bigger the pushback is. Mm-hmm. So while many don't understand what was going to come down in the relative near future, the that pushback to critical race theory, what's happening in the political discourse, even more polarization, and really the overturning of affirmative action, I think are processes of the racist progress we're seeing. So where I'm actually I struggle, where I find my hope is in my faith. I couldn't do this work if it wasn't for the belief that even or odd, we're going to be moving towards that direction. There is going to be victory, whether it comes through horrors or the inevitable progress of us as a human race to advance towards that recognition of our oneness is coming. So where I see hope is the forces of integration, where I see young people using platforms that very effective social media platforms to push for racial change. Where I see hope is, I actually really saw it after the murder of George Floyd. We were all in COVID, and the kids were demanding, clamoring for us to really change what we were teaching, the content and how we were teaching them. And the teachers, interestingly enough, while we could in a span of weeks learn how to teach online, we somehow didn't know how to teach about the forces and issues that were facing them. And so some students got so fed up that they stopped waiting for us. They started creating their own learning experiences. And to me, that was really interesting. And I'll give you an example. At Overlake, students really wanted to have an ethnic studies course. They spent a couple of years trying to work with the director of teaching and learning, with the department chair. And I was watching this happen. It was slow as all get out. And finally, they just got so fed up, they created the course. So the course that was taught this past year was created by 15, 16-year-olds. So that's where I see hope. I see hope in the impatience of young people to say, we're not going to wait for y'all anymore. But with that, I see grave danger as well coming. Our schools, issues around racial diversity have been, the language we've used to push for racial justice have been co-opted to really hold and maintain the status quo. And the more change happens, the more that we recognize the changing demographics, the more those forces are going to be, and I fear more violent those forces are going to be. So it's really hard time to do this work. It's really hard time in our collective history as a humanity. And oh, well, we got to still do it. So if I start to think about how scary it is, how hard it is, I wouldn't be able to get out of bed. And it's just like, well, I can't think about it because we are, for whatever reason, every single one of us has been here at this time in the history of the world to be a protagonist and play our part. So that's what we got to do.
Thank you.
Sure. Charlotte, yeah. Oh, we can't hear you. I think you're muted, Charlotte.
Now am I okay?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Well, I tend to look at young people and feel very optimistic. And I'm just wondering, as an educator working with kids from all grades levels right now, you're working with all of them, aren't you? Pretty much.
Yeah, 5th through 12th, yeah.
So is your sense that these kids are kind of beginning to see through the falsehoods and the omissions and did you feel like they are able to see with a clarity that maybe previous generations haven't been able to at their ages?
I think intellectually, yes, but intellectual understanding is not enough to change and transform the human heart. I think one of the challenges we face as a society is, as I said, we're more segregated and unequal than we've ever been. So one of the challenges I see in the students I work with is they have no proximity to kids of different really racial backgrounds, especially in a private school. I serve the elite of the elite. There may be a few handful of students, but the majority of the students is a very homogeneous population. And honestly, independent schools, and you didn't hear this from me, but I've often been asked myself the question, are they a benefit to society? Because many of them came into existence. If you look at the history of most independent schools in the country, they came about as a result of a federal ruling of Brown versus Board of Education to integrate. So my position was created kind of to kind of make them feel good about their elite being elite. And so my worry and my concern is that kids are in more and more segregated environments, and they don't realize they're in the bubble. So when we talk about, for example, affirmative action, we have a lot of our kids who are so, against affirmative action. And when I sit and do trainings with them, help them understand how unequally they are beneficiaries of privilege. And, to me, is jaw dropping. And that 13 miles across in Seattle, there are schools where students don't even have access. Where my daughter went to public school she was in public school in Queen Anne, about 7 miles south at another elementary school. The principal was asking parents to donate crayons and paper. This is America. And when I was doing my graduate and undergraduate work, going into different schools based on the zip code of where children were living, the majority of our schools are either 90% or higher Black and brown, or 90% or higher Asian and white, and desperate and unequal. It is a human rights issue. And so my worry about kids is that the deep challenge I have in serving, and I tell people I work at a high risk school, people laugh at me. But what I see is that my kids have an intellectual understanding. They can tell you the laws and the history, but it has never shifted their behavior. And because they're not in relationship and they don't have proximity. And why I think as a Baha'i, it was so important for me. And I think the Institute process and the Baha'i faith of the core activities is where you do this work, is because you're studying the Baha'i writings and you're serving. So when, as a youth, I spent all my time either working with the King Center or going to very predominant Black communities in the South, going to senior citizens' home, going to churches, you begin to sit with people, you form relationships with people, you begin to love them. And so when things happen on the societal level, there's love there. So you're forced to action. And the greatest challenges that we're dealing with are great apathy and lethargy, high levels of distractions, and a national movement to keep our population ignorant. And that reminds me of what happened in Iran before the theocracy. So when you want to keep a population ignorant, where you don't want to teach Americans about their own history, that's by design. You want to graduate kids who are going to make choices in a democracy that are anything but that are going to threaten that democracy. And so the banning of books, the laws and legislations that are being passed right now, the overturning of affirmative action, these are highly concerning. And the worst part of it is that kids aren't perceptive enough to know that social media platforms and the bubbles in which they live are just reinforcing what they know, and that are directly threatening their ability to think critically and to search for truth. So I think there's a lot at their fingertips, but there's a lot of forces that are challenging those exact things. It's a very hard time to be a teacher. Joy DeGree recently told me that in the state of Georgia, they passed legislation that teachers can't say the word diversity, equity, and inclusion in the classroom. This to me sounds like pre-revolutionary Iran. It's like all the things I was witnessing as a child when I saw my teachers I was witnessing that my teachers were not able to say and do the things that they were able to do before. So yeah, I think our democracy is really also threatened right now. It's a scary time.
Yeah.
Yes.
I was wondering that the little kids, they don't usually know what racism is. They are kind of colorblind. They just play with each other. They don't even see each other's color. As long as you are working with the children, at what age these things comes to them? Is it just the parents or society, or what else is affecting?
Well, research has shown that children can start seeing race as early as 18 months. And they're able to make meaning of race as early as 3 years, 2-3 years. When I taught in a Montessori school at the beginning of my educational career, I was in graduate school, I taught in a 3 to 6 year old classroom. Oh, the things you will learn about what children are making meaning of. When you watch children's play, the meaning they make of race, the meaning they make of gender roles, religion, all of this stuff come out in their play. They actually are repeating what they're seeing in their environment. The Shoghi Effendi, the guardian of the Baha'i faith, stated in the 1920s, we're not immune from the forces in our society. I mean, even for Baha'is, we have to be very, very careful, because we think, oh, we've got these teachings, we've got these prayers, we're safe. We're not. We're no different than anybody else's. We have these teachings, but we have to put them into action. And so I think it's a very dangerous place when we think that children don't make meaning of this. I remember I went to my son's classroom many years ago. I think he was 6 years old. I went in to talk about Dr. Martin Luther King on MLK Day. And I was talking about Dr. King, and I said something, I said, Dr. King is Black. And one of the children raised their hand and says, you can't say that, that's racist. And from a place of inquiry, I said, tell me why you think it's racist for me to talk about Dr. King being Black. You're not supposed to talk about race. Those children are picking up what they're hearing and what they're not hearing in their classrooms. And so what I often tell teachers is not just what you do say, is what you don't say that children make meaning of as well. Mm-hmm. And so I think these forces are very much alive and well, and they'll regurgitate them. My children, as early as 4 or 5, my son used to say things at age 4 that he made meaning of. He would say things like, all Black people are rich, all Black people are poor. And he would say things because he was saying what he understood. And thank goodness that he felt safe enough to say those things, which they all do at 3, 4, 5. And then we have conversations about them. My daughter would say she was ugly and she wished she was lighter. Where do you get that? I never at home said to her she was ugly because of her skin color, but they're making meaning about the society around them. They're these subconscious forces. That's what makes racism so evil, because it's not, and Americans are like, I'm not a racist, because they're thinking, neo-Nazi Ku Klux Klan. The racism we're talking about is a thing that permeates our souls, that is the disease of our souls, that is subconscious, that we think we're somehow better because of that, is the social, is the meaning we've made about race. So yeah, the research is very clear that kids as early, and then what they're around. If, and we live again in very segregated environments. If babies and infants aren't accustomed to seeing different types of faces or facial features or skin color, they're not going to be comfortable. So.
So I was wondering, the first time that I personally became aware of Juneteenth was when this letter was around the time that this letter came out from National, and subsequent to that, it's been made a federal holiday. But up until that time, it was I went to public school K through 16. It was never mentioned in any of my classes. So my question is, do you know when it actually began to be part of our history? Is it really this 5 or 6 years ago?
I mean, no, I think, Juneteenth came about, in 1865, when the community in Galveston, Texas, was told about the end of enslavement. Because they were one of the last communities to hear it. But it was initially a Texan kind of thing. Growing up in the South, as I was mentioning, the Baha'is had a picnic. It was often in the Black community. In my own education, not in K-12 either, but in college, I got to hear about Juneteenth. So in the African-American community, was very much celebrated. And with the migration of Blacks who were escaping, so as Ryan Stevenson notes in his work, that in the early 1900s, Black people were living as refugees. They were refugees. They were escaping extreme violence in the South and lynching and murder. And so when Black communities went north and they went west, they also took this holiday in families and communities within the church or within their local communities. So it's been a holiday that's been celebrated long before the federal holiday. But I will tell you, I am certain that it's still not being taught in schools. The historical relevance of the holiday. Maybe now a little bit now that it's a federal holiday. But just to give you an idea, I even took AP history in high school. Never until I got to my freshman year American History Survey course did we ever study the treaty at the end of the Civil War. We didn't even study that in the South. In the state of Alabama until a few years ago, Dr. King's birthday was Dr. King / Robert E. Lee Day. Mm-hmm. So the resistance to racial justice is as strong as the racial progress that we were seeking to make. Yeah. And I was alive when Miss Coretta Scott King was fighting so hard to make her husband's birthday a national holiday. And I was aware, because we volunteered at the King Center, of the great resistance to that. So that first march was huge. And the Atlanta Baha'i community played a huge role. We were always marching in the King parade. And we were one of the largest groups because the American Baha'i community was so excited. Everyone would come down to Atlanta. So that weekend, it was one of my favorite weekends because all my friends would come stay over from all their colleges in the mid-Atlantic region, from Chicago area. They'd all drive down and there'd be like 20, 30 people in my house. And we'd all go and march in the parade and participate in the festivities. There was a prayer breakfast that Miss King, so there was a service at Ebenezer Church that happened the Sunday before, and I still think it still goes on. I think Mr. Stevenson spoke at it recently because I watched the video of it and showed it to my students. There's a program at Ebenezer that Sunday morning before the federal holiday. Mrs. King, and she was such a champion after her husband died, and not enough credit is given to her. She was a champion of pushing her husband's work, would host an interfaith prayer breakfast. And the Baha'is always were part of the program. I performed about 6-7 years, about 12 feet in front of Mrs. King, a dance on racism. And people from all different faiths would come in and read their writings, and the Baha'is played a key role. And then it would be the Ebenezer program, and then it would be the march. It was a really just such an incredible time, such a celebratory time. I actually missed it after I moved away from Atlanta because there's nowhere like Atlanta that it was as exciting because of the sacrificial efforts of Mrs. King and the resistance she got.
Thank you.
Yeah.
In 1988, my family moved to Galveston, Texas, and I became a school teacher and later a librarian in Galveston. And we were not a big Baha'i community. We had enough to have an assembly, so we had probably 9. And our participation in Juneteenth was to show up with a wagon full of water bottles. Everybody else, of course, they were making their own celebration, but we were present. And of course, they have a reenactment of the reading of the Emancipation Proclamation from the original home, where it was, I mean, from the place where it was originally read, is the way I should say it. But my children, many of you know Mandy and Scott, they can tell you that we never missed a Juneteenth.
That's great. Wow. That's amazing. Thank you for sharing that.
So Mahtab, but
Yeah.
so can you tell us a little bit about what you're doing at Overlake? But it probably just give us a little overview so that we can kind of.
Sure. I've been spending a lot of time this last week praying and really truly asking God to help me. Baha'is believe, and I'm going to get to the answer to your question, Baha'is believe that we're very close to those who are in the next world, and that we can pray to them to advance their souls, and also pray to them to ask for guidance and support. So I have next to my bed a picture of people that have passed away, and I often pray to them to help me. And among them are Frederick Douglass, Harriet Tubman, Bell Hooks, and among my members of my family. So I've been saying lots of prayers to actually make impact, because as I said, the work is so difficult and it's so easy to be hopeless. And so often what I try to do is work in faith for that great vision that's ahead. But much of the work I do is training teachers. I lead professional development in the school towards advancing equity and diversity. And it's interesting because the place that's the most resistant is around dismantling anti-Blackness. And but that's the work that I try to center, and it's difficult because I'm often pushed to, center everything, which I do. I do a lot of work around professional development. So that happens about 7 to 9 times a year. So for in service, for example, I'm leading a 3-hour training on a book that the community's read about Stereotype Threat by Whistling Vivaldi. Then I run 10 co-curricular programs throughout the year for students around DEI skills. I have 15 affinity groups that I train the affinity leaders who are adults for 5th through 12th grade for racial-based, religion-based, LGBTQ affinity spaces. Our strongest and most active is our Black Student Union. They were our first affinity space and very much resisted when they came into existence, and they paved the way for everybody else. So really strong leaders there. So that's what I do on the people side. Then I work a lot with recruitment and hiring and retention of employees of color. And why I will tell you, having been involved in the hiring process for 9 years, I knew this intellectually, but hiring for diversity and cultural competency at every stage of the hiring process is met with resistance. We reproduce hiring whiteness all the time. The system is designed to do what the system is designed to do. So when I disrupt, I'm often faced with great resistance from the community. That's another area I work with. I work with retention of people of color around supporting and advancing them. I do the same process with recruitment, admission, and retention of students of color. And we have in our strategic pillar a commitment to bring in Indigenous, Black, Latino students and students who qualify for financial aid. And that sounds really wonderful up here, but it's met with grave resistance. And now, frankly, I'm worried that it's in danger because of the affirmative action. Now, that the overthrowing of affirmative action does not apply to our schools, but there are already court cases in the Southeast, I think in the state of South Carolina, for 503Cs. So if it's overthrown, that could directly impact our ability to serve specific and targeted populations. And so those are things I do. And then I'm responsible for anything that celebrates and honors different diversity of different cultures and people in our school community. And then I work towards policies and procedures at the schools, such as, for example, our overnight sleeping arrangements. So they're equitable, inclusive, to make sure students who are receiving financial aid have an equitable experience at school and are not hindered in any way. Students who are Black and Latina and Indigenous who are significantly underrepresented in our population, are not there, that they have an equitable experience. And all those things are extremely hard to do. And so what you do is you often hold the stories of injustice. You try to push to make those experiences better for folks. And then I deal with a lot of behavior issues, a lot around misogyny and sexism, a lot around racism, microaggressions. So when things kids do to other kids get to the level that there's a behavioral action, I usually get involved to help discern what that should be. But I'm usually involved in dealing with the parents, and usually involved in though I don't do restorative justice, I'm not trained in it. They call it restorative justice, but we really don't do that. I'm involved in the education of those students who've been the perpetrators of that harm. So those are some of the things I do. So, and I'm the most under-resourced, and as all DEI offices are everywhere in America. I have the least numbers of FTEs in my office. I'm the only other person besides the head of school that works with every constituency in the school. I'm the least paid in the senior administrative team. And I have the least amount of FTEs in my office and the greatest charge. So it's crazy pants. But I mean, I'm sure even the DEI folks at Netflix and Google and all those people are in the same boat as me. It's the thing that we say we value the most, but if we really want to have transformative change, we would be doing things differently. But we really don't want that transformative change. We just want to say we want it. So.
Wow, you really tire me out, considering how much, not only that you know that you do, and even for some of us who know her, I had no idea the wealth of knowledge and love and caring you have to make this world different. I can't thank you enough, Mahtab.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
Thank you for having me. And I would say the greatest force is love.
Yes, it is. And I'm going to spread your love around. I'm going to make sure that a number of these schools here know about you, and you can have another profession if you wish, and that will be a speaker, nation and worldwide. And I'm so glad I know you here in our small community. You're
Honored.
great.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Oh,
Thank you for doing this important work.
well,
Thank you very much.
I hope we get to do it again with more people, because all of us are going to go tell our friends just how much we've enjoyed your talk tonight and visit with us, and your ability to really cover an incredible spectrum of the human endeavor in trying to make this a better world. So thank you for all your effort, really.
It takes a whole village. So thank you for also working alongside. It takes all of us. So
before I end, is there anything else anyone else would like to say to Mahtab? And we'll let you know that this has, okay.
Trina wanted to say something.
Listening to you, I'm just full of a million thoughts and things to say. If you've heard of this book, you'll probably understand why I'm saying what I'm saying. I just finished Sunday evening, Jonathan Eags' King Alive. And you might want to look it up. It's on Amazon. It's the story of King's life and work. But what's significant about it is that many sealed FBI and other files, as well as interviews that have never been recorded before, and points of view are available in this particular write-up of his life. So everything that you're saying that's universal is measuring with me in the examination of the King philosophy, its origins, as well as how the philosophy became scaled in real life. And also in the book, I don't know how much is written about Coretta, but there's a huge examination and reporting of her personality and what she gave up for the movement. And you're exactly right in your comments. So thank you. And thanks to Andrew, my colleague at work, for inviting me to this. I do think there are much larger audiences for the message that you have to share. Andrew, we must talk.
Let's have lunch. Are you when you're in this week?
I know. Yeah. I'll be in tomorrow, and I'll be in your office.
Okay.
Talking Rain is where we work, and we're the the headquarters is here in Preston, Washington. It's sparkling ice, which is what you see in the water aisle. It's the number one sparkling water in America.
Yeah.
Andrew and I are part of an initiative that is really trying to push the bar on more of these kinds of critical conversations. And I think with the planning that's going on right now, Andrew, I plan to make a few suggestions, which I'm sure after knowing me for a year, you can imagine what they are. So, so that was a long kind of discussion. Just thank you for who you are.
Thank you, Trina.
And the message that you bring. I would really enjoy meeting you for a coffee one day.
I would love that.
I'll set that up. Okay.
Okay, good.
Yeah, so I would be honored. I'd be
good. I've worked in corporate America 40 years.
Yeah.
The only reason that was possible was because growing up in the hood in Kansas City, Missouri, my mother put us in scouting, and she said that the world is not just what's going on this block. So what she did was my philosophy of having somebody to open up the window for you, let you look out and show you what's possible, not where you come from dictates.
Wow, that's beautiful.
And I have a bachelor's and a master's from 2 white private colleges, 40 years in white corporate America. And it just occurred to me listening to you, when I show up, when I have shown up in the interview process, I believe I've been a disruptor, because I believe people have looked up and said, how the hell did she get here? But you could never refute the references that I had. And a short conversation started on Teams a few weeks ago, because I work in HR. And somebody said, we were just talking back and forth. It was a day after affirmative action was overturned, and everybody was pissed, but they didn't want to say a whole lot in the company network. But one of the things I told them was, what I just said, about where I went to school. I was in Girl Scouting. I was a disruptor in that as well. It's like, how'd you get here? Is affirmative action is not only a law, but is a level of thinking. If we don't have that level of enforced thinking, we get left out.
Yes.
That's why we say we've got to have somebody at the table, regardless of the situation, who understands a minority point of view, whether it's me and who I am, whether it's you and who you are, or the other people on the call. Affirmative action is a thought process. If you take away the enforcement, then there's no consideration. And so one of the things I wrote in our comments to each other in Teams was that even the Underground Railroad didn't work without white people. Okay? It didn't. So you're going to take away affirmative action. It's going to take away the fact that we need to be considered, which is the thinking. So that somebody can judge me by the content of my character, not the color of my skin. And so what you helped me realize tonight is that I've always been a disruptor.
God loves the disruptors.
Yeah, we need more disruptors.
No, I really, and you're the peacemakers. I mean, I think of all the things that we think about, Dr. King right now, he was, as you know, as you read the book, he was FBI's #1 man. He was. Yes, there is
so much more elaboration in this writing of his life about the racism that drove that effort, because that's all that was driving
Mhm.
the FBI. Yeah, check out Jonathan E. It's EIG, Jonathan E.
Yeah, it just came out.
Yeah, it just came out. It's King in all caps, a life.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Trina. I look forward to having coffee with you.
Yes, I do too. I do too.
Thank you for
Yes.
what you shared. Thank you.
Hey, yeah.
Anyone else? Any more comments? How did people like the film? We talked about the different messages in the film. Did you like the film itself and how it was made? Oh, good. Well, make sure Michael knows. We're very proud of him and the work he's done in that film. Okay, well, we've got to let this lady get back to her family. She does still have family that are waiting in a couple of rooms, including the dog. And I thought originally the dog was excited because it saw Trina's dog. Oh, but you've done a great job.
Thank you.
Yes.
Mahtab and you, Karosh, you've done wonderful. This is being recorded, and when we finish this, and it is edited, and it will be on YouTube, and Karosh will notify everyone that it's available for you to watch again or share with someone else. And I would really suggest you share, because this has been a fantastic night. And I agree with you, Trina, it needs a bigger audience. And that way we'll get that audience for not only ourselves, that's the hope, Andrew, right?
Mhm.
We go
Yes,
forward
for
with
sure.
that. And
Thank you, Donna, for hosting this. You've been a wonderful host. I've enjoyed it.
oh, appreciate it. Thanks again. And thanks everyone for attending, and have a great Washington State beautiful evening. It's a great sunset out there. I can see it, so you won't miss any of it. All right. Good night.
Bye.
I wanted
Night.
to
Thank
just
you.
say hello. I'm sorry I'm late. I got the invitation. We have a monthly race amity gathering Zoom that we just conflicted. That's why I was late. But I'm very much appreciate the invitation, and hopefully I can participate more further at another time. So thank
Yes,
you.
Kristen, make sure you see the recording. We'll have it sent to you, okay?
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Take care.
Okay.
Good night.
Good night.